Přátelé filmu, vítejte zpátky. Vítejte ve virtuální hospůdce jménem FILMPUB, ve které si povídáme s českými i zahraničními tvůrci o jejich práci, zákulisí filmového biznisu, ale také o osobních radostech a strastech na projektech, které vidí tisíce, statisíce, někdy dokonce miliony lidí. To je případ i dnešního hosta, který je pro mě velice speciální. Bylo mi totiž před časem ctí dělat rozhovor zhruba hodinové délce s animátorem, storyboardistou, scenáristou a režisérem Tomem Owensem, který prošel studii jako Disney nebo Dreamworks a během své kariéry spolupracoval s biznisovými legendami, jako jsou Jeffrey Katzenberg, Bruce Timm nebo Chuck Lorre. Během své kariéry se podílel na vzniku filmů jako Jak vycvičit draka, Kung Fu Panda, Shrek 2 nebo Princ egyptský. Jeho počáteční práce byste ale našli i v seriálech, které vychovaly nejedno 80kové a 90kové dítko v Československu, jako Darkwing Duck, Letohrátky, Malá mořská víla, Aladdin nebo třeba Tiny Toons. Jelikož rozhovor nevznikal ve studiu, ale v improvizovaných podmínkách zámku Litomyšl během animačního workshopu Anomália, omluvte prosím lehce sníženou kvalitu záznamu. Další disclaimer je, že rozhovor samozřejmě probíhal v angličtině a nemá doprovodný překlad. I tak si ale myslím, že by vám mohl předat spoustu zajímavých informací. Tak se hezky posaďte a užijte si to, jako jsem si to užil já. Alright, Tom, welcome. Thank you for joining the interview.
My pleasure.
And how's your coffee this morning?
Oh, it's great. I'm so glad that Hansa brought this machine. It's wonderful. It's fantastic.
Okay. We start in the beginning. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, where was this spark of your inspiration, to become animator, director, head of story?
Oh man, by the time I was 8 years old, I already was declaring I want to be a cartoonist. At the time, I loved newspaper comic strips, particularly Snoopy, Peanuts, and I loved drawing comic strips, like newspaper comic strips. And I wrote letters to, Charles Schulz and Jim Davis, the guy that drew Garfield, and just asking questions and stuff. I'd never got any personal letters back. I got like form letters, just thanks for being a fan kind of letters. But at any rate, that's what I wanted to do up until I was about 12, I think, 12 years old. I rode my bicycle to an art store near my home where I lived in Indiana, and I found a book on animation. It's a book you can still buy. It's written by a man named Preston Blair, who worked at Disney and other studios. And the book's been around forever, but I saw this book and I'm thumbing through the book and I thought, this is how cartoons are made? And that instantly changed. I was like, nope, I want to be an animator. And so all through junior high school and high school, I just drew nothing but cartoons. I never was I didn't like superheroes. I didn't like, I wasn't interested in drawing people. I liked primarily funny animal stuff, like Walt Disney's Robin Hood movie with the anthropomorphic animals. I loved that stuff. And I loved Don Bluth's The Secret of Nim. I must have watched that 300 times. I had the movie, I memorized the dialogue of the whole movie. And then when I was a teenager, just a series of amazing coincidences led me to the industry, and I met this girl at a video game arcade in the local shopping mall. I was playing a video game that's animated, that was made by Don Bluth, called Space Ace. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. But I'm playing the game, and this girl that works there, and she's got her change, to make quarters for kids to use for the games. She comes up and she stands and she's watching me play, and she says, when I'm finished playing the game, she asked me, do you like cartoons? I said, I love cartoons. I want to be a cartoonist. And she says, I'm going to Art Center right now, but I'm transferring to Cal Arts. And I said, that's where I want to go. I want to go to California Institute of the Arts as well to be an animator. And so she says, I actually am in a club with a bunch of cartoonists, some of them working professionals. Would you like to come with me and meet them? And what we do is we meet 4 times a year, quarterly, and we make a stapled together comic book. Everybody draws a 3, 4, 5-page comic, and we bring it and we collate them, we lay them out, and we stack them and then staple them, and everybody goes away from the party with a comic of everybody's work. So I go, and I meet these men, these, again, adult people. Here I am thinking I'm hanging out with rock stars, right? These are people that work in the industry that I want to do. And my parents met a couple of these people. They didn't feel very comfortable with a couple of them, but one of the men, my parents instantly liked him and trusted him and felt comfortable with letting me go places with him. And he invited me to go to the San Diego Comic-Con. This is like 1986, 87 maybe. And the Comic-Con was at the Holiday Inn. It was tiny. It was not very big at all. Nothing like it is now. And it was nothing but comic artists and original art for sale and animation people. There was no movies. There was no video games. There was no costumes. I mean, a little bit, but not much. It was still very much a kind of a nerdy thing. People still thought of it as being somewhat nerdy. And so he invited me, would you like to come with me to the Comic-Con? And my parents paid for our hotel room for him to chaperone me for a few days to go to the Comic-Con. And I went, and I met people that worked at Don Bluth, and I met people that, worked at other studios. So I'm getting phone numbers from people. And one of these men, a guy named Ken, he invited me during my last 2 years of high school, at least twice, maybe 3 times. He invited me, hey, have your mom bring you up to me and leave you with me for the day, and you can come to work with me. And so my parents were more than happy to let me skip school for a day, and my mom would drive me to Hollywood and drop me off with him, and then she'd just go shopping all day and then come back and pick me up at the end of the day. And I stayed with him all day while he's working, and he's talking about how he works and what his job is and explaining the process and introducing me to the other artists. So, as you can see, this is such an amazing advantage for somebody. So when I was coming close to graduation, Ken contacted me. He called me up and he says, "Are you graduating next week?" I said, "No, the week after. I have 2 weeks left." And he goes, "Well, put a portfolio together of your work. I want to introduce you to somebody who's hiring for a job for the summer, and I'm going to be working there. You can come and we'll see if we can get you a job." And this was at DIC, D-I-C Animation. If you've ever seen Inspector Gadget,
yep.
They made that. They made the animated Ghostbusters series in the 80s.
I also think they made like Sonic the Hedgehog
Yes,
series.
So you're familiar. So that studio was the company. It was in Burbank. And I went up, met Ken. He takes me to the studio and he introduces me to John Kricfalusi, who years later created Ren and Stimpy. But this is way before that. This is the summer of 1988. And so I meet John, and he looks at my stuff, my drawings, and he hired me on the spot. He said, "Yeah, I'll hire you." And so I worked for the summer, my first job right out of high school, and I worked that summer as a character layout artist, which is posing. You take the storyboards for the scenes, and you're assigned, I think we were responsible for doing 10 scenes a week each. So you get the scenes that you're supposed to do, and you draw the background exactly the size that it's going to be under camera. So you're laying out, this is where the elements of the background are and the characters and their acting poses. And then they sent that to the animators in overseas to actually animate it. And it was a great experience. And then sorry, that's a long explanation, but that's how I got into the industry.
I think you covered everything.
And by the way, just a couple of years ago, I was at a party and I met the girl from the video arcade.
Okay.
I was at a party and I was talking to her and I didn't remember. I thought that she was the friend. So I'm saying, "Did you have a friend that worked at the arcade in Brea?" And she goes, "That was me." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" I said, "I'm so happy to run into you." I said, "You're like the linchpin for my entire career. Just meeting you caused all of this other stuff to happen." And it was really neat to see her and chat with her. So
we are a proof that sometimes the life is a series of accidents, happy accidents.
Yeah, completely. In my case, certainly, but yeah.
I was surprised that DIC Entertainment was like this base for all these household names these days. That
Yes.
Chuck Lorre was working there at the time.
Yeah.
Bruce Timm, Paul Dini.
Yep, and I knew them all. I don't know if I think they might remember me, but I don't. I'm not friends with a lot of them. But again, I'm working on a show with the guy that later creates Ren and Stimpy, one of the most important cartoons of the 1990s, which I did work on. But at the time, he's collected a group of artists that any one of your listeners can look up and see their work. There was a guy who sadly passed away a couple of years ago. He had a minor heart attack while surfing and drowned. Okay. He would have survived the heart attack, but he was surfing and he was out in the ocean and he didn't make it back to shore. But his name was Chris Riccardi. Chris was on the show. His future wife, Lynn Naylor, was on the show. John Kricfalusi created the show. Bob Camp was on it. Jim Gomez. All of these people that were later really big deal in animation, in television animation, certainly. Bruce Timm. And then the next year, after that show was canceled, I went to work at Warner Brothers Animation. Again, I was working on the Tiny Toons show, Tiny Toon Adventures.
That's actually, to be honest, is one of my biggest inspiration.
Really?
Going into film. And my first VHS tape was Tiny Toons, How I Spent My Vacation.
Well, okay, great. Yeah, I worked on that stuff just for one season. But I was there on that first season, and I remember Bruce Timm, again, just one of the artists there. He was at that point developing Batman and the Batman animated series that we all know, and his style. I saw him one day working on the storyboard that was going to be the opening credits.
You were supposed to steal that. That would be...
I wish I had, boy. That would be very valuable today. But yeah, I walked into his little area that he's drawing. I said, "What are you working on?" He goes, "I'm developing Batman." like no big deal. Like just my normal day job. And it turned into something so huge. The writers on his show, Paul Dini, he's now a very powerful Hollywood writer. But he was just at Warner Brothers Animation at the time. Yeah, I mean, I lucked out. I fell into a group of very important and influential people later. Years later, this is interesting, at Dreamworks, many, many years later, Jeffrey Katzenberg used to like to have really big deal directors come and talk, and they would announce, we're going to have James Cameron come and talk to the studio, and everybody would gather in our cafeteria. It's a very big room, and we would all sit around, and they would set up a stage with microphones, and Jeffrey and whatever director he was interviewing would sit there, and they would talk, and then they would answer questions. And James Cameron said something that I thought was really interesting, and I said, I thought myself, I did that. And what he said was, he said, make friends with the people that you're working with currently, because all of you are coming up together. He says, don't try and become friends with people that are much higher. Like, don't go to Steven Spielberg and go, hey, I want to work with you, because that ship has sailed. He's already got the people that he works with. He said, concentrate on the people that are around you. Form groups that you like to work together, that you understand each other, and come up together. And that's the best advice he says, I can give you, the best advice I can give you. And I thought, I kind of did that totally by accident, but that's exactly the way my career went. Like I just fell in with a group of people that happened to, like, every time a job ended, somebody would go and find work elsewhere, and then they would start calling their friends. Hey, come over here, and work on this show that we're working on. And yeah, it's been great.
Actually, I'm not sure if you realize how influential you partly are in Czech Republic for the kids, because you also worked on shows that were very popular here in the 90s, like Darkwing Duck, or Aladdin TV series, or my personal favorite, Tailspin. That was something with like Gummy Bears and DuckTales, the old ones.
Yep.
That was very influential. And actually, a few years back, I also saw the new DuckTales that you also worked on.
I did, briefly.
So my question is, like, how do you feel about it? That you worked on these things that are so influential that now you are actually teaching here at Anomalia, that people that were watching that, and then they said, like, I want to be in animation. When
I was working on all of that Disney television animation stuff on Tailspin and Darkwing Duck and Goof Troop and Bonkers and Aladdin, I was a character designer, which I'm not trying to disparage that job title, but it's not as fun or as fulfilling as being an animator or a storyboard artist. It's really kind of a nuts and bolts job. So I didn't have much to do with those things. I just designed background characters for those shows, and I was there for 5 years. And so I'm glad that people really like them, but I don't feel that I had much to do with those shows. I feel like I had more once I got into storyboarding. That's when I really feel like now I feel really proud of having worked on How to Train Your Dragon or stuff like that.
Now we will be all watching the backgrounds in those series, just because you said that.
Right. But yeah, it's and then when they redeveloped Darkwing Duck, I was looking for a new job. I was leaving Disney. I was leaving DreamWorks, and DreamWorks was this is around the time that Jeffrey Katzenberg sold DreamWorks, and they were laying off anybody that wasn't attached to something. So as soon as people were coming off of a project, they were just getting let go. And internally, we're thinking Jeffrey must be selling the studio, and they're trying to get the monthly costs down by getting rid of the artists. And so I got let go, and I was looking for work, and I got a job as a director on the DuckTales series. I wasn't on it very long. I went over to Disney Television Animation to direct on that new DuckTales series, and I was only on it like 3 months, and worked on just a few episodes when they removed me from the show. I still, to this day, I don't really understand why or how. They just called me in after lunch one day and they said, we don't think it's working out, and they let me go. And I thought, and I remember thinking, everything that I've done, if I was working on a scene, storyboarding something, and I'm like, oh, I'm going a little bit away from the script, but I think this is a good idea, I would contact the director and I'd say, hey, come look at this. Or, the head director, the lead director. Supervising director is what they call it. I called him. I said, hey, come into my office. I want to show you something that I'm doing. And I would show him, what do you think of this? I'm going a little bit off the script, but I think it's kind of funny. He's like, yeah, that's great, keep going. I only got positive feedback from him, from the other storyboard artists who were on my team, from the editorial staff. I got along great with everybody. So it was really weird how they decided I wasn't working out. And I was like, what in the world is going on? So I didn't last very long. I didn't work on it very much.
I still saw the episodes you did, actually.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I think still that's pretty great. I was actually surprised because, universally when you have these revival shows, everybody is not expecting much these days because it feels like a corporate cash grab.
Yep.
But I was really surprised how funny it is and how modernized it is based on the old cartoon.
I did like the design quite a bit. It was a little bit more like Carl Barks.
Yeah.
Not exactly, but it was pushing toward a comic book sensibility, and I really like the look of it.
Because here in Czech Republic there is a lot of fans that are still buying these, Donald Duck comics with these oral stories, and actually Karl Barks is very popular here.
Yeah, he was amazing.
And when I get back to 1998,
okay,
so you probably know the question, you started working on Prince of Egypt. Probably sooner because 1998 was the release date.
Yes,
I guess. So was that the big transition that you started working on something really big, from TV now going into the movies?
Yeah, well, yes. I up until that point, again from 1988 to 1997, everything I did was in television animation, and I was, nearly 10 years into my career, and I had moved up, my salary had increased and stuff. But when I met people, when you meet somebody and you're having a drink with somebody at a bar and inevitably the conversation moves to what do you do for a living, I would just say I'm an animator to people, which of course wasn't technically true. I work in animation, but that was too much to explain. But in my heart, I was like, I want to be an animator. I actually want to learn that skill. And the man that was one of the higher executives at DreamWorks at the time was a man named Ron Rocha, who I knew from Disney and a couple of years ago. I'd known him for a while. So I contacted him and I asked to see him, and I went to see him at Dreamworks, and I said, I would really, really like to come and work here if you'll have me. I said, I want to come and be an animator. I've never done it, but I just want to try it, and I think I could pick it up pretty quickly. And I realized that I'm going to have to start as a trainee, and I know that I'm going to have to take a cut in pay because I've achieved a certain level of pay, and a trainee is way below that. So I know that that's going to be a thing. I can't afford to do that for very long. Like, it'll be very tight for me to do. So just keep an eye on me, please. And if it works out and I'm picking it up, promote me or kick me out, like, so that I can't do this for very long. So I got the job, and they tried me out, and I worked as just training for like a month, not even, a month. They gave me a couple of scenes to work on, and I seemed to have picked it up very quickly. So by the end, in 1 month, they promoted me to animating assistant. And that was my credit, I think. It was animating assistant or assistant animator on the Prince of Egypt. But I was animating. I wasn't assisting anybody. I was doing nothing exciting. I didn't do any of the main characters and stuff, but I did, in the Red Sea, parting the Red Sea scene, I did lots of the Hebrews running from the Egyptians. I did Egyptians chasing them. I did in the scene where Moses goes back to see his brother Ramesses, and he goes into the court of the king, and there were dancing girls with the ribbons in the background. I did those. It's just one, but it's repeated 8 times. But I did the girl dancing. I've never done any dancing. I don't know anything about, choreography or anything like that. They just assigned me the scene, and I thought, oh boy, this is scary. And I did it, and like I just kind of invented it. And it's just a cycle. She picks up the ribbon, she twirls, she does this, and then she winds up in the same position again. And it's just a cycle that's repeated. And then they duplicate it, slightly offset, so the timing is a little bit different, and it feels like it's just a continuous flowing movement. And they liked it, so they gave me other scenes. And I don't know if you remember this. There's scenes in that movie where when Moses goes and he meets his future wife, and he's living with the men in the Midianites out in the desert. There's a song scene where they're dancing around a fire. So they assigned me all of the Midianite men dancing. And I didn't like that, but I had to do many, many, many people dancing. And then I finished that scene. It took a long time to do. And then when I was done with that, they tried to give me another scene. Now this is a helicopter shot, up high, looking down at the fire, and 2 rings of people, like 20 people times 2 in a ring around a fire, dancing around the fire from above. And they assigned me that scene, and I said, please don't give me this scene. And the director said, oh, I thought you liked doing the dancing. I'm like, I do not like doing the dancing. I really don't.
I actually had the question, like, if there is something you hate doing, like no drawing and animate, then I have the question.
Yeah. Well,
I have the answer.
Well, there's that, and there's also, I like, I told you before, I've always liked cartoons. I like the old Tom and Jerry shorts and the Looney Tunes cartoons and Tex Avery and Droopy, and I love that stuff. That's the stuff that really makes me excited. So when I was animating on the Prince of Egypt, you know what it looks like. It's a very serious looking, set of cartoon character designs. I didn't particularly like drawing it, but I was learning animation, so I was enjoying myself because I was learning that craft. I was never a very good animator, but I was learning it. And then on the second movie, The Road to El Dorado, it was a little bit more cartoony, and so it was fine. But yeah, drawing that very, very serious art style was difficult for me because I like cartoons. And then I worked on Spirit, the horse film, Stallion of the Cimarron. My gosh, that was a hard thing to draw. That one was really real. And of course, because it's horses, do you understand the concept of animating on 1s or 2s?
Yes.
Okay, so everything was being animated on 1s, so that it wouldn't strobe, so that it wouldn't, so it wouldn't pop. You have to do it on ones, meaning one drawing for every single frame. So it's twice the amount of work as a scene that you do on twos, where you shoot every drawing twice. And very realistic, very, the movements were not cartoony at all. It was just really realistic, and it was very hard, not fun. And at one point I thought, I'm going to give up. I'm not enjoying this. This isn't fun for me. I like watching it, and don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to disparage the movie. I just really like funny things, and oddly enough, some of my favorite jobs, like How to Train Your Dragon, it's not a funny movie, but I'll get to that in a minute. Like why I liked it was a different thing. But I considered going back into television. And I was very close to going and working on SpongeBob SquarePants. I had a friend that was over there, and I said, I gotta get out of here because I'm not having any fun drawing this. It's not enjoyable. And thankfully that didn't happen. But yeah, so that's what I didn't like. Drawing things that I don't want to draw. I often thought in the 1990s there was a style that was emerging in animation that I'm sure you remember, like Rugrats. Yeah. Was a, again, I'm not trying to be mean, but it's sort of an ugly, on-purpose design sensibility. Yeah. I think it's ugly, and I think it's on purpose. They're making it look very quirky and odd. But I looked at that and I thought to myself, I don't ever want to work on something like this. And that style was catching on. Other cartoons were coming out with a odd look about them. And I thought, boy, I hope this doesn't spread everywhere. Like, I hope that every cartoon doesn't start looking like this.
I'm curious, how hard was it for you to go from 2D to 3D?
Well, it wasn't very hard at all, as long as I got to keep drawing.
Till it was fun, it was okay for you?
It was fine. It was great, because I got into the industry to draw. That's all I want to do. I love drawing, and so it was just a happy accident that I got to do storyboarding, because I avoided storyboarding for a number of years, because when I was young, when I was in my early 20s, I lived with a roommate that I worked with at Disney. We shared an apartment together. My roommate was a storyboard artist, and I saw him always working overtime, always working late at night and the weekend, and he never had any free time. He was always racing to meet a deadline and worried that he wasn't going to finish on time. And I thought, ugh, that sounds terrible, because they give you a script and you've got, 6 weeks, and you have to turn in a stack of, this 3-inch thick stack of paper with drawings on it, and you've only got 6 weeks to do it in. And I thought, man, that's a big responsibility. Well, so when animation went away, as far as drawn animation was going away and nobody was doing it anymore, and the animators were all being trained to go into CG animation, I didn't want to do that. I don't want to sit in front of a computer. So I got into storyboarding out of desperation, just so that I could keep drawing. And again, another very happy accident. The very first thing that I storyboarded, I really enjoyed, and it wasn't like animation, where, if you're Glenn Keane or James Baxter, or one of the really great animators, you get all the really good scenes. But if you're like me and you're like a lesser animator, you're getting background stuff and less interesting stuff. So you're not doing anything that moves an audience. You're not doing anything that people get excited about or they remember, the best scenes of the movie. But when I got into storyboarding, suddenly I have the entire moment. I'm issued this scene in the restaurant or whatever, and I have to develop the idea of how they come in, and if the characters get into an argument or a fight and somebody's upset and they leave and the other person now feels terrible, whatever. I don't know what the scene is, but building that was, to me, a revelation. Because, as I did the storyboards, I wouldn't even ask permission. If I thought of something that was funny, that was different than the script or whatever, I would just draw it and try it and then go and pitch. And then when I pitched it, everybody in the room laughed at it. And they said, man, that's great idea, you know. And that felt great. And I thought, this is fantastic. Plus, it has the added bonus that I don't have to draw and model. I don't have to draw the way it's going to look. Granted, storyboarding is an early part of the process, so a lot of times the character designs aren't even done yet. They're still working on them. But it's a really great part of the process that I can develop my own way of drawing the character as long as you can look at it and say, oh, I understand that's supposed to be this character or that character. I can draw the character however I want. So again, another little reason which makes it fun for me to do is I don't have to draw, you know, the characters like in the Prince of Egypt where they're very angular and square and I have to draw it that way or else it's wrong. But the best part of storyboarding is just that, getting to build a moment to sell an idea. And you know, one of my favorite examples of working at Dreamworks was on the original How to Train Your Dragon, which, by the way, they made 3 versions of that movie. The first version was going for a while, and I just worked on that one a little bit. I got on that version of the movie very late, and it wasn't working, and they decided to shift gears, and the directors were taken off the project and given other stuff to do. They weren't fired. They got another guy to come in and try the second version, which I worked on, and I really enjoyed that version of the movie where it was following the book, and the book is just a children's book. It's a very simple idea.
Very goofy also.
Yeah, very goofy. And the dragon was tiny. He was a little tiny dragon. And we thought at the time, we want to figure out some reason that the dragon gets big, because of course if you're watching a movie about a little kid and his pet dragon, you want to fly, you want to go flying on the dragon. So the dragon has to be bigger. We all knew we need to make a story point that the dragon's growing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then again, the movie wasn't working out. It wasn't making people happy, so they decided to scrap that version of the movie. And then the movie that made it into the theater, we made that movie in about, I think, 14 months from the time the 2 directors came on it. There's like just over a year left to go, and it has to be in the theaters in 14 months or something. And that's one of the best years of my whole career, was working on something where we got together in a room and we just pitched ideas and we made each other laugh, or that's great, go work on that. And then we go work on it, come back with an idea. Hey, I tried this. What do you think? The director goes, yeah, that's great. And we weren't answering to a committee of executives who go, oh, I don't know about that. Maybe it should be blah, blah, blah. It was just like, it has to get done. We have to do it yesterday. And so the whole year we throw out ideas and somebody's like, that's fantastic, that's in, and it stayed. And so
is the pressure good for creative process?
Yes.
In this case?
Yeah. Every time, movies take 4 years maybe, and as you're working on it, even if you came up with a phenomenal idea on the first year, there's almost no chance that's going to be in the movie. So it's disheartening when you're working on something and you're really excited about it, and they go, yeah, that's great, let's try this. Let's just keep exploring. And it's in the last year when everybody's like, okay, now we have to make decisions. Yeah. It has to be done. So back to what I was saying, one of my favorite moments ever was I boarded the scene where Hiccup finds Toothless tied up in the forest. And it was launched to me. It wasn't scripted yet. There was nothing there. Just the directors were like, why don't you start working on the scene where Hiccup finds Toothless in the forest because he got shot down and he's tied up. And he goes and finds him. And just start working on that, maybe figuring out what the scenes might look like. And that scene, as it's in the movie, just exactly the way it's in the movie, just came to my head. I was like, I know exactly what I would do. If I was going to direct this scene, I would draw this. And I just started working through the scene of him walking, and he finds where the dragon crashed into the trees and they're all knocked down, and he walks through the trees, and then he goes up over the rise and he sees him down the hill, and he hides and he's scared, like, what do I do? Pulls out his little knife and he goes down, and that whole thing where he's standing above the dragon going, yes, I did it. I finally did something good. And I wrote the dialogue, I'm going to cut out your heart and take it to my father. That felt natural to me. That's what I would do. And I didn't think that would stay, but it stayed. They kept it. And yeah, that was a great moment. When I pitched it and it went over well, and of course it wound up in the movie, that just felt really, really good to get to develop those entire moments that people will remember. That's really satisfying.
I was curious because in the first movie you set up that the mother of the hero, Hiccup, was this big breast woman with the breast, shield plate. But in the second movie, she's not like that. Did they change in the process?
Yeah, well, yes. In the first version of the movie, we went through various versions of the characters, and for a long time, Hiccup's mother was a character in the show. And for whatever reason, I never understand why they remove mothers, or sometimes fathers, but it's unusual to see two parents in an animated movie for whatever reason. But we played with the idea for a while that Hiccup's father and mother were very passionate, like very passionate. They were intense lovers. So the implication was that they were always, enjoying each other. But because they were Vikings, they were physical, like fighting, like pushing each other and shoving it, just because we thought it was funny. And of course they said we can't do that in a kids movie. But we played with them being very intense and hitting each other, and then they get excited and they disappear to go do what adults do. And for whatever reason, they wound up writing her out of the show. Then in the second movie, when they're developing the idea of maybe Hiccup meets his mother and she's been living with dragons all these years, what kind of a person would that be? And it felt natural that she be. Good morning. It just felt natural that she would be kind of weird, like somebody that has been living out in the woods with animals might have adopted animalistic behavior and
something traumatic.
Yeah, hasn't had a conversation with anybody for many, many years, and she's kind of a wild animal herself. We didn't quite go that far, but we absolutely developed it that she was, very unaccustomed to dealing with interaction with humans, with other people. And we backed off of that idea, but she became, again, she still retains that almost animal-like behavior, but more importantly, she's very in tune with dragons. She's been with them so long that she instinctively knows how to communicate with them, which Hiccup happened upon, obviously, in the first movie, by accident. So he and his mother have something in common. They share that, and it's a good thing for them to bond over until the mother reveals her ultimate goal is to separate all the dragons from people, because people, they don't understand, and you and I understand. And Hiccup's like, no, that's not a good idea. We really like our dragons. And so that sets up the conflict. So.
And how did you set on the design of the new dragon in the third movie? Was it from the beginning obvious that it will be Night Fury again, but just the
female, the girl, the white one?
Yeah.
I worked on that movie a little bit, not a lot, but they came up with the idea of this. I mean, Toothless was always kind of feline, cat-like in his behavior. And so naturally they wanted to, in making an attractive female dragon, characters with feline sensibilities tend to be, for lack of a better word, kind of sexy. Like it's a graceful movement that cats exhibit. So naturally that kind of lends itself to a female character. So they really leaned even harder into her being feline. And then they gave her the added in discussing animal behavior, it's very common that the female of the species can hide. Like female ducks look like the dirt in the ground and the leaves and stuff because they need to be able to sit on eggs. So that discussion of she needs to be able to become invisible and disappear because she's female, it turned into literally she can become invisible. Like she can reflect what's around her and disappear. And I think that's more or less how that came about. I actually suggested at one point, because we're talking about animal behaviors and stuff, and I'm sure you've seen the Planet Earth,
yes,
the documentary series. I love that series. I bought it on Blu-ray, and from time to time I just put it on and let it run in my house because it's so beautiful.
Yeah, just the shots are amazing.
It's beautiful, yeah. And of course that series has all those great moments of bird behaviors, like the one kind of bird that is setting up its mating ritual of like cleaning out the area and throwing away all the leaves and clearing a place, and then he puffs up and he does that weird dance, like he's like, and looking this way and that and trying to impress the female bird. And we all thought that was great. That was new at the time. That was a recent series. And I suggested, and I still, to this day, I still think this would have been really a wonderful scene, and they didn't go for it. But I suggested that when Toothless, he and Hiccup are out, and suddenly Toothless becomes very alert, like he knows something, and Hiccup's like, what is it? What is it? And before we see the female, Toothless instinctively knows somehow she's around, she's nearby. And so he goes into a behavior of trying to impress a female. And I suggested the idea that in his neck, down under his chin, there would be like a crack that would open up, and like a bright, vivid red neck balloon would go thump out like this. Yeah, and he would, good morning, and he would wiggle it, like, and he would make noise and like chirp and dance, and this thing would be bobbing. And of course that would be hysterical. If you saw, Toothless he's such an awesome character. If suddenly you saw him do something completely goofy like that, it would be...
it would be something new, and also it would be connected with this mating, in the world of nature.
And it would be funny. Now, they did ultimately, there is a scene where I think he holds his wings up in a circle and looks up above. And it works. It gets the idea across. But I thought, and it is funny, but I really thought it would be hilarious if right out of nowhere this bright red thing comes out and it's huge, or maybe it's blue, but whatever, it's just this wiggly looking balloon comes out of his neck. We didn't go for that, but...
Well, you also directed the short movie, this Christmas special, Gift of the Night Fury.
I did. Not many people saw it, but
I think it's on some of the Blu-rays or DVDs, I guess, because I have a feeling I actually saw it. Mm-hmm. How was the process on that?
Well,
and did you feel the pressure on it as a director?
Yes, sure.
Or were you like, it's okay?
No. I got the... Okay, let me back up. When I was on How to Train Your Dragon 2. I told you before how on the first movie, the directors were removed and whatnot, and when we decided that the second version of the movie wasn't working, and they brought in Chris Sanders, and Jeffrey showed him the movie and said, I need you to come over here and take this over and deal with it. And they looked at it, and so much of the money has been spent. The character designs are built and rigged. The locations are there. They're sets and they're done and they're lit. You have to use this stuff. So you're stuck with all of this. You don't have a lot of money left. You've only got 14 months left. Will you take on this project? And so they looked at it, and he said, I want to get my friend involved, Dean. So he called him and said, come down. Dean was living in Seattle, Washington. Come visit me. I want to show you something and see if you want to take it on. So they look at it, and they decide to take it on. But they said to Jeffrey, we'll take this on, and we will do the movie if we bring in our head of story, our producer, our editor, and we only answer to one person, Jeffrey, not a room full of, not a committee. We make this movie. We don't have a lot of time to argue. We develop it. We show it to Jeffrey. Jeffrey either says yes or no, and that's it, and we make it. And they said, okay. So that was great, and it worked out great. But at the time, it was a little bit frustrating if you're on the movie to be passed by if there's an opportunity for a good job and they blow you off and give it to somebody else. The guy, a friend of mine who was the head of story, was removed. The producer was removed, and people were just taken off. Actually, Bonnie, the producer, she stayed, but they brought in other people and replaced people that were already there. And then on the second movie, I was head of story, but there were certain there were frustrations with that. There's always frustrations with things, but at one point I thought I'm never going to get the chance to do anything bigger, like an advancement. I don't think they'll give me a chance to do directing or whatever. So I was looking to leave. And I started interviewing, looking around town to see what was going on elsewhere, to see if I could get a job. And I have no idea. I'm sorry, I'm getting this wrong. At the end of the first movie, it was before, I was head of story after the directing thing. That was the order. So at the end of the first movie, I felt like I wasn't going to get any more responsibility, and I just wanted to do more. I wanted to have some more responsibility, and so I'm looking around to leave Dreamworks, and I interviewed at a couple of different places. And one day I got a telephone call from Jeffrey Katzenberg's assistant, and she said, Jeffrey Katzenberg would like to see you. Please come meet him. And I went to see him, and of course he's the guy that runs the company, and I thought, am I fired? Am I in trouble? And he says to me, I understand you're looking around for another job. And I thought, how on earth do you know this?
Everybody knows.
I guess everybody must know, and it must be a thing in the industry where when people are leaving the other studios out of courtesy, they must contact. Hey,
yeah, it's the same here. In television.
Okay,
they actually reach to each other.
Right, which was a surprise. And so, good morning. And so he says, I want you to stay, and if you'll stay, I'll give you. When Dragons is done, there will be some ancillary, secondary project, maybe a short, something on the DVD, but I'll let you develop it and direct it. And I said, okay, great, that's fantastic, I love that. So I stayed, and I came up with this idea for the holiday special based on the Christmas story, the Gift of the Magi. Is this a story that you're familiar with? It's an old story about a very poor couple, mm-hmm. and the woman in the story has beautiful long hair, right. And the man, the only thing that he owns of any value is he owns a beautiful watch with a chain, beautiful pocket watch. Okay. And they decide to try and get something nice for each other for Christmas, but it's a tragedy. She cuts off all of her hair to donate it in exchange for money to buy him a chain for his watch.
Yeah, I know that.
And then he sells the watch to buy pins for her hair. That's the idea. So I was thinking about that tragic love thing. And so I pitched this idea that Hiccup builds a tail that works. He fixes Toothless's tail as sort of a Christmas gift. By the way, we called it Snoggletog. We couldn't, obviously we were not going to use Christmas, but Dean, the director of the movies, came up with that concept. He said, we'll call it Snoggletog. I'm like, that's great. So Hiccup, as a gift, fixes Toothless's tail, and then has to deal with the repercussions of Toothless flying away and leaving and not being with him. And then, what happens? And so he's gone for the episode. And then he comes back at the end, and my original pitch was he comes back with Hiccup's severed leg. Like he went and he spent time looking around and trying to find the leg, and he comes back with, like, so the idea was that, you know, Hiccup would realize that Toothless is on the roof of his house banging, like, come outside, come outside. And so Hiccup comes out, and the dragon's sitting there all proud, and Hiccup walks up to him, and Toothless goes, there you go. And you would see this mummified boot, good morning, with a bone sticking up out of the boot. And it wouldn't be bloody, it would just be like a mummy, dusty and old. And I pitched this idea. I just thought it was such a cute idea that it's gross, yes, but it's also sort of cute that the dragon would go and try and fix his friend, and then ultimately he comes back and Hiccup realizes what he's trying to do, and he's like, oh, buddy. And the dragon keeps like pushing the leg toward his severed, you know, his peg leg, like put it on, like put it back on. And Hiccup explains, like, you know, he's like, oh, buddy, that doesn't work like that. And eventually the dragon understands that, oh, that's not going to work. So he looks at his own tail and he shatters it. He shatters the new fixed wing that Hiccup attached, and he throws it away. The idea being, if I can't fix you, I want to be like you. I want to need you. And I really like that idea. Well, the studio, the executive that I was pitching this idea to, he kind of recoiled a little bit, like, ew, that's gross. But I'm trying to explain, I'm like, it's not bloody. It's not going to be gore. It's just like a mummified, dusty shoe with a bone in it, you know.
It's actually very similar to the scene in the first movie in Toothless tries to bring the food.
And he barfs on him.
It's also like disgusting a bit.
Yeah.
But then he's like, yeah, I have to bite it at least.
Yes. Yeah. Good morning. So they said they said we'll do this show, but you got to come up with something different. So if you've seen it, you know that Toothless goes away to try and find his lost helmet. So I don't think it's as good.
It's not as personal.
It's not as personal, but still, Toothless is trying to do something personal as a gift. And so the entire episode is he fixes Toothless's tail, Toothless leaves, and then for the rest of the episode, you have to fill that space without Toothless. And this was challenging because the producer, Bonnie Arnold, she didn't like it. She says, we can't do a show about Toothless and Hiccup and Toothless isn't in it. So they kept trying to force a story point back in that made it possible for us to just see Toothless. And at one point, they were pushing for the idea that that somehow they know that there's a terrible storm coming, a snowstorm, and Hiccup thinks the tail can't survive, you know, the material that I made it out of can't survive a frigid winter, and it's going to shatter or it's going to break. And somehow they know instinctively Toothless is going to get in trouble and they have to go rescue him. And this was an idea that was really pushed hard. And of course, I'm a first-time director and I'm trying to balance, you know, people's egos. But I kept saying, you can't do that. We can't, if this is going to be special at all, we can't see him. And if the tail breaks, or the tail can break, then Toothless sacrificing it at the end is meaningless. If it could break anyway, who cares? It needs to be perfect. It needs to never break. It needs to be something that absolutely fixed him, so that when he breaks it, it's a sacrifice. And so this finally won them over. And I said, what if we need a scene, I don't think this one works, but I will create a scene. What if Hiccup has a dream? You have a scene where they're together, but then it turns out to be a dream, and it's Toothless literally evaporates, like just goes away, and Hiccup is reaching for him. That way we can see Toothless, but it's not really there. And they said, okay. So I storyboarded this scene, and it's not in the final show because we had to cut that scene to shorten, to keep the episode down. Granted, this thing was made for television, and a television half hour is 22 minutes because you have to have time for commercials. So we had to hit that 22-minute target. I couldn't add that scene because it just was too long. Something had to go. So that scene got sacrificed. So ultimately, I got my wish that we don't see Toothless at all. Now we have to fill that space with other stuff. We have to make it entertaining. Well, as we're developing the story, they said, again, this is not my idea. We're developing it, and the executives are there. And I don't remember who said this. Somebody suggested, what if suddenly all the dragons leave? And I said, well, the whole purpose of this episode is that Toothless leaves, and it's Christmas time, and everybody else has their dragons for Christmas, and Hiccup is alone without his dragon, and so it makes it kind of sad. It seems to fight that idea if everybody's dragon went away. But nevertheless, they really wanted something like that. So what we did is we developed this notion that it's an instinctive thing. Like it's that time of year where the animals have to go and spawn children, young, and so they suddenly just leave, and nobody understands why. But as the dragons are flying away, one of the characters goes like, "Huh!" Like, I gotta go get my dragon. And we find out later that he chained his poor dragon in a barn. And all the dragons are gone. Nobody understands why. But there's still one dragon in town because Fishlegs kept his hidden in a barn. Hiccup discovers the dragon and unchains the dragon. And the dragon, almost like a drone, is just flying at the end of its chain, tugging, trying to go. And Hiccup releases the chain, and away it goes. It takes off. Now Hiccup is on this dragon, flying somewhere. And meanwhile, the teenagers, they come back and they're like, "Oh, Hiccup took my dragon, dang it." And they go in and they discover that the dragon laid eggs, and they're hidden under a pile of straw. And we came up with this idea, this very funny idea, that Astrid is trying to come up with new holiday, since their holiday is wrecked because the dragons are gone and everybody's sad, she's trying to come up with ideas that are going to cheer everybody up. So she comes up with new holiday traditions. And because they discover these eggs, they're like, we'll put these in everybody's stocking in their homes. So they sneak into people's houses and they take the eggs and they stick them in stockings by the chimney or in a boot that's sitting by the hearth next to fire. And they think, oh, this is going to be great, and they hide them. And ultimately, they discover that Hiccup, on the dragon, they fly to an island where all the dragons have gathered, and he goes and he learns that the dragons hatch their young. And he's like, oh, you guys came to have babies. And we learn that the eggs are explosive, dragon eggs, and we see one of the dragons push the eggs that it's laid, good morning, into a pool of water. And then they glow and they explode, and the dragons swim up out of the water, and that's how they're born. And one of the eggs is still laying out in the ground, and Hiccup's like, "Hey, you forgot one," and he's walking toward it, and it explodes, and it's a huge explosion. And Hiccup's like, "Whoa!" and the little dragon falls out of the sky, and it's perfectly fine. But Hiccup says, "Man, it's a good thing that those don't hatch on Burke." Now, we've already set up that they've hidden the dragon eggs around town, and we cut back, and the kids are all excited. Yay, this is going to be so great. And one of the houses explodes in the background, and then a dragon falls out of the sky, and they learn, oh my gosh, the dragon eggs explode. And then one by one, the houses start boom, 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 exploding. And it was cute, and it was a good way to address the note. The executives wanted the dragons to go away. We had to figure out something. So all of this we came up with internally to make it work, and it was very entertaining and very funny. And then ultimately, Toothless comes back, having brought back Hiccup's lost helmet. And then hi, good morning. And then at the end, Toothless wants to go flying again, but he wants Hiccup to put his saddle back on, the regular saddle. He wants it on, and Toothless is like, "Put this on me, put this on me." Pushing it toward him. And Hiccup keeps saying, "No, buddy, you're fixed. You don't need this anymore." And Toothless shatters the tail. He breaks it and throws it away. Like, in other words, I want this. I want you. And it turned out really great. I'm very, very proud of that show.
when I hear talking to, you know, when I hear you talking about, you know, the development of the story and the storyboards, I'm always thinking about how do you approach this process, because you know, as a writer, it's usually like a long hours of suffering.
Yeah.
Just thinking about stuff, and sometimes, you know, like wanting to hit the head, you know, at the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the same for you as a storyboard artist or a director, that you are just like, oh man, what I need to do now?
You know,
and then it just clicks.
It's I think when writers are working on something, they're working with just there's nothing. There's literally nothing. It's a little bit different being a board artist, or at least trying to tell a story, because in that situation, I have a problem to solve. For example, the executives wanted all the dragons to go away. Good morning. So all of the dragons are going to go away. I'm presented with, how do you solve this? Now I have something to work on, and I can create something to fix that. But if I'm starting from zero, like a writer, yes, that is very, I would imagine, a big challenge to try and come up with something interesting. So I can't say that I'm very good at that. But when I'm on a project and I'm given a scene to work on, and the idea is we need to solve this idea, we need, you know, Hiccup finding Toothless in the forest. Now you've presented me with something. How do I make that interesting? And that, I don't find, sometimes it's hard, but it's a lot easier than a writer starting with just a blank page. Like, I have nothing, and you have to invent something interesting. So it's a little bit different. I do understand what you mean about, you know, banging your head against the wall trying to come up with something. And to a degree, yes, I have to do that. Like, when, again, in my head, when they said, you have to make all the dragons go away, at first I thought, that's a terrible idea. You know, how can I make that work? Because it doesn't make sense. The idea of the story is Hiccup is missing his dragon. The other dragons can't go, because then everybody's having the same problem. It doesn't work. But when I'm presented with that problem, and I know these are executives, I can't ignore the note. I can't not do it. I have to do it. Well, how do I solve that? What's the best way to make that interesting? And so yeah, and we didn't, honestly, we had several writers, but the way that show worked, I came up with the initial idea, and we didn't have a lot of time to do it. So myself and the storyboard artists and my friend Kate, who was the producer, we just got together in a room and we started batting around ideas and working. Again, the way I like to work is just work with people and go, what if we did this? What if we did that? And then launching it, and people just started to go out and work on the scenes. Meanwhile, the studio, they have that mindset of, we have to have a writer. And so they bring in somebody who comes in to write the thing. Well, we're already a little ways down the road. We're developing it and we're working on it. And we pitch them what we're doing, and then they go away and they write a script and they come back, and it's completely different than what we're doing. We can't stop and start over again. Again, it's like we're laying the track. We're on the train laying track in front of us, right? We're building the story. And that writer that started on the show, and by the way it works in the unions in Hollywood is that the first writer ever on a project, whether he finishes the movie or not, gets top billing. Always. That's the rule. So he didn't work on it very long, but it's written by his name, Adam F. Goldberg. Adam F. Goldberg, who I haven't seen since then, he's extremely successful now. He created a TV series called The Goldbergs, based on his growing up in the 1980s. It's got kind of 80s reference stuff in it. It's a very successful show, and he had sold the pilot while he was on this show with me. And so he said, I got this great opportunity, and we're like, hey, congratulations. And so he went away to make his show, which made him very famous. And it's so cool, you know, that I got to work with Adam Goldberg before he was Adam Goldberg. But meanwhile, so he leaves, And we are very confidently making our movie. We're storyboarding it and writing it and editing it and looking at it, and they bring in another writer, and one of the executives, Greg, says, "Oh, I got the perfect guy for you. He's great. You're going to love him." They bring this guy in. We pitch him what we're doing, not what we're intending to do, but we're in the middle of it. We're doing this, and then he goes away and he writes something completely different. And he comes back and we read the pages, and Kate and I look at each other, Kate the producer, and we're looking at each other going, we can't do this. We don't have time to change this much. And it was like this throughout the rest of the process, that they brought in another writer, and they brought in another writer, and a guy named Adam wound up being the writer that finished the show. He stayed with us. But again, we were, there's a deadline, and we're making the show. So we kind of wrote it internally. There were a few little gags and things that came from writers, but a lot of it, the primary chunk of it, was the story team, which, again, I love working that way. I love just getting in a room with people and beat out an idea and make each other laugh. It was a very, very satisfying process. And I had hoped that would lead into. It happens often that people direct some short like that, and the next thing you know, they're directing a movie. And for whatever reason, that didn't happen for me, and I don't know why, but that was disappointing. I didn't get to continue doing that, but I did really thoroughly enjoy doing it, and I'm proud of it. I think it came out pretty great. But not many people saw it, so I'm surprised that you even know what it is.
I'm pretty sure it's either I saw it on YouTube, someone leaked it,
yeah,
or I saw it on Blu-rays, because I was in the past a big collector of Blu-rays before streaming and everything.
You haven't gotten rid of your Blu-rays, have you?
No, I have the entire collection.
Yes, I've got binders. This many binders full of discs of movies.
Like hundreds of it, and like every few years I'm like rewatching it or try to rewatch it.
Yeah.
And usually I'm just like, I remember it much more fondly than it actually is.
Yeah.
Right now. But it brings me to the final question. You said that you were not too fond of the 3D. You didn't want to sit in front of the computer.
Yeah.
As a job. So how do you approach, this new era of AI, of course? Is it something that you are afraid of, or you are welcoming it for some part of the job?
This might be a mistake. I'm not afraid of it. I certainly think
people is like generally like afraid of it, that it will steal jobs.
Right. I certainly think it's going to change things. But I don't think it's going to be. I don't think it's going to wreck film or animation. I certainly think it'll become helpful as a tool to do, background animation. If you've got a scene where it's set in a crowd and there's 1 million people in the background, usually you have to have animators animate those people. In fact, there's a job description called crowd animation, and they do cycles of people just standing. If like something terrible happens, people like just simple animation. But when you multiply that by 1,000 people reacting to something, it looks, full. Well, I certainly think that background stuff like that, stuff happening in the distance, could be handled with AI, and maybe even animation. You might use it to get yourself started. You get a piece of animation moving, but then the animator, much like on the Lord of the Rings movies, when what's the actor's name that did Gollum? I can't think of his name right now. Andy Serkis. He acts the scene, and then they capture the movement, and then the animator sits at his desk and he gets that information. So you've got it, but the animator still has to push it and tweak it and move things so that they fit, so that they move into a silhouette that's pleasing. And you tweak it and you improve on it, and it might wind up being a thing where it's used as a tool to get started. But I think the human touch is very important and will always be there. At least I hope it'll always be there.
Well, it was a very hopeful ending, and thank you for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. This was my pleasure.